Hi, I'm George Kaltsudis, illustrator and comic artist, and you're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming at DCAUreview.com and on your favorite podcast app. I am Vengeance.
Hey everybody, welcome to a very special bonus episode of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal, and with me, my good friend, good brother, the man that runs our Twitter account. It is Liam. Liam, it's our third annual Black Friday special as you and I get together and drop a special bonus episode, really capitalizing. I mean, really talking about nostalgia as we tend to do on this program anyway, but we're going outside of the standard cartoon world here. That's right. We've talked about toys in the past. It's Black Friday. It's the holiday season. We're going to be talking about the things that both children and grown adults love. That's right. Today we have a very special Black Friday edition of the DCAU Review.
That's right. And as you mentioned, it is in the past, we have talked about various DCAU figures that we enjoyed, whether those be the more modern DC Direct, DC Collectibles ones, or the classic ones from Kenner and Hasbro and Mattel. Either way, we've spent lots of time talking about action figures, but this year we thought we'd go a little bit in a different direction. That, of course, is video games based inside the DCAU. So, and you wouldn't think there had been that many. I think for an average person, even some super fans like ourselves, we thought we had a pretty good handle on the list. And then we kind of looked and thought, oh, wow, there's you forget all of the various consoles that would have a port of either another game that we played on console, or an entire different version of a game, or just a game that was its own standalone thing. So there are actually quite a few DCAU topics to talk about. And why don't you kick it off with a first entry on our list, Cal? We're kind of going in like a vague release order way as we're talking about. We're not necessarily picking these as our favorites just yet, but these are the ones that we played growing up, and again, as you mentioned, probably into our adulthood in some cases. And these are some of the ones that we have the most fond nostalgia for.
That's right. Yeah, this won't be a full encapsulating list. If you're interested in looking at that, recommend you head over to the DCAU wiki that did not pay for a sponsorship for this, but you can check it out because that's where we got most of our information on the details about these games. But yeah, we have to kick it off with the very first Batman animated series associated video game. We had a copy of Batman the Animated Series for Game Boy that originally was released in November of 1993. So that was not too long after the Batman the Animated Series really kicked off. And the funny thing is that we didn't own an actual Game Boy growing up, like the original Game Boy. As we'll talk about later, you eventually got the Game Boy Advance, but Game Boy was not something that we had, but we did have this adapter that you could plug into your Super Nintendo system and then play Game Boy games on. So then you played Game Boy games on your Super Nintendo with Super Nintendo controllers and on your television. So playing this game, I never had the handheld version of the Game Boy. We never had that. So this was all Game Boy games on a full-size television. So we were somewhat spoiled, I feel like, in that way. However, this game, my main memories of this game are how incredibly frustrating it was. It's not an easy game. It's very difficult. You do, of course, get to play as Batman. You're wandering through, and there's the villains that you come into contact with are the Joker, Scarecrow, Mr. Freeze. Catwoman is later on in the game. I don't think you fight her. I believe she's just a side character. Poison Ivy is one of the villains. And then you get the Riddler and the Penguin also appearing in the game. But yeah, it was not an easy game to play as a child. And then I can remember breaking out the Super Nintendo maybe a decade ago and giving it a go again and still having the same frustration with it. It is not a child-friendly game, which there is a theme that seemed to be throughout some of the DCAU games, as we'll talk about later on with some of the most notorious DCAU games. But yeah, this one, I think my main memories were always getting past the Joker level, which is your initial level, and then you get to the Scarecrow level. We actually get to play with Robin, which was I think super fun. And obviously you and I growing up, we're two young boys growing up in a house, have an appreciation for Robin. So you get to play a whole level as Robin against the Scarecrow. But you get to the very next level. The Scarecrow is hard to defeat because Robin, instead of having like batarangs, he had like these, I forget what it was. It was like a slingshot.
Yeah.
Which is very like, where does that come from? I don't remember Robin using a slingshot too often in Batman the Animated Series. Correct me if I'm wrong. But Robin with a slingshot defeating the Scarecrow was a difficult task. So then by that time you get to the Mr. Freeze level, your lives are drained. There's no kids these days are spoiled with continue spots in their games. There was no continue spots. So if you died in that level, you had to go all the way back to the start of the game. So this one was an interesting one. I have a lot of fun memories playing it, but I have a lot of frustrating memories, and never in my entire life was I ever actually able to defeat the entire game.
Yes, same. I actually, in addition to playing it on the Super Nintendo adapter later on, when I got a Game Boy Advance for Christmas, I did. That was back in the day when you bought a new gaming console and you could play the previous versions of that console's games on it. Way back in the day. That no longer being the case now. But I remember playing it a little bit on the Game Boy Advance too, and not getting any further than we probably ever had on the Super Nintendo version either. But yeah, I have some fun. It's the things that really stick out to me beyond, as you said, the sort of hard nature of gameplay. And part of that is, I think, because games like that, especially in that era, if you actually know what you're doing and you learn the patterns and everything, like the game is about an hour long. So it's taking into account, it's counting on the fact that you're a kid who isn't going to learn the patterns right away and is going to die and have to go back to the beginning to sort of increase your hours of entertainment, I suppose. But
or frustration.
Right. Now, but yeah, probably my defining thing is that when you turned the game on, it had I guess that would be an 8-bit or even like pre-8-bit version of the Batman the Animated Series opening title sequence, which folks who follow us on Instagram and Twitter probably saw this week. You did a kind of a mock-up of the finale of that, but you have the shot of the Batmobile driving, you have the thugs running through, and then that final shot of it panning up the building and seeing Batman standing there with the that 8-bit version of the Danny Elfman theme playing. So yeah, that's probably the defining a feature of it. I looked up a YouTube playthrough of the game this week in preparation. Definitely like that music and sort of the general aesthetic of it, even though, as you said, the weapons and such that some of our heroes use later on in the game maybe don't match super well. But remember that, and sort of like the sort of drawings of the characters' faces, and it's not a cutscene because there's no actual video, of course, but just sort of the picture of our character's face next to some text that we would see between each level. So that's kind of the stuff that I remember from this game. But yeah, even though it was frustrating as a kid, and I'm not confident I could even beat it now. If anything, my hand-eye coordination and ability to beat challenging video games has only gotten worse as I've gotten older. So I'm not sure that I could even handle it now. But there is definitely, this might be pure nostalgia at this point, but I do still have a lot of fondness for it, if only for maybe the aesthetic and the music. If not,
I would say the music is a big part of it too. As soon as if you watch a playthrough on YouTube, which I'm pretty sure probably all of the games that we're going to talk about today, there are playthroughs available on YouTube that you can check out. Actually, some of our friends over at Watchtower Database, Ted, has played through a lot of these. So if you want to check out some playthroughs, you can check out on the same pod tower that you're listening perhaps to this episode on. You can check out some of his streams. But it's the music, I think, is the music and the graphics. People loved the nostalgia of an 8-bit game. So everything that goes along with that, the music, as you said, the recreation of the Batman animated series, opening intro, and then the theme song throughout each level. And especially when it changes to the boss, when you get to the boss, there's this wacky theme that plays. So I think that's the defining characteristics of that Batman, the animated series for Game Boy game.
Absolutely, and that'll knock us over. Speaking of Batman the Animated Series, or its technical sequel series, or the renaming of it on Fox Kids, of course, when it later on became The Adventures of Batman and Robin. This is another one of those that had multiple versions released. If you may be familiar with the Sega version, which was more of like a sort of like a run and gun type game where you're just kind of running and throwing batarangs, and it's a little more colorful and involved, and you actually have Batman and Robin on the screen all the time as you're facing off the various villains. But we, Cal, as mentioned, had the Super Nintendo, and so we had the Super Nintendo version of this game, which, while maybe not as chaotic as the Sega version, maybe feels a little bit more like you're just visiting some sort of classic episodes of the show, and you kind of have just like a classic like side-scrolling beat 'em up type thing.
Yeah, and this one I think is near and dear. I think hours and hours and hours of my life were played or were wasted or enjoyed playing this game. This, of course, released in 1994 for the Super Nintendo, as you mentioned, also Sega Genesis and Sega CD. The Super Nintendo version that we had levels that were basically based on episodes of Batman the Animated Series. So you had a Joker level that took from Be a Clown and Christmas with the Joker. You had a Poison Ivy level that encompassed both Dollar in the Bad Episode Jar, Eternal Youth, and Pretty Poison. You had the Penguin level, which was based on Blind as a Bat. You had a Catwoman level that was based on the Cat and the Claw. You had a Two-Face level that really wasn't connected to anything, but it was cool because you got to drive the Batmobile around.
Yes.
And then you had a Scarecrow level based on Nothing to Fear, and then you had the Riddler level, which I think is maybe the most iconic level for me in the entire game.
Yes.
It was based on both If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Rich? And What Is Reality? And then the final sort of the finale of it all included On Leather Wings. So and the Joker rocks a jetpack that he of course would rock in Mask of the Phantasm. So there's lots of this being grounded in the Batman the Animated Series, various elements that you saw play out in episodes return. Not only that, but you had title cards for each of the levels that, of course, make these stand out so well. Some of them a little bit derivative of the ones that you would have seen for the episodes on your television screens at the time, but still, it very much grounded in that. No voices in this yet. We're still pre-vocal performances, but Alfred makes a cameo in it, communicating to you. You do have, again, not cutscenes, but you have dialogue that sort of comes across the bottom of the screen at times, and you can almost picture the voices coming through anyway. So Harley Quinn even makes a minor appearance in the game as well. So this one, without a doubt, I think I have the most nostalgic feelings about, and I would play this game today if I had the opportunity to go back, and I do. I still own the game. I still have a Super Nintendo. I think I could hook it up and play this game today and still have fun doing it. But I think, Liam, the most important thing about this game was that there were cheat codes to get you to all of the levels.
Yes, so you didn't have to play from the beginning if you didn't want to. And you could pick what gadgets you wanted, even if, although that could sometimes come back to haunt you, because you could have all of these different gadgets, bombs and smoke bombs and knockout gas and batarangs, but you had to cycle through all of them with the directional pad. So if you were in a bind and really needed a specific gadget, and you're like, why did I bring the X-ray goggles? I don't need those for this mission. It kind of trip you up. But yeah, the things that I think stand out to me about that, once again, as you mentioned already, the title cards, the revisiting sort of classic moments, the first Joker boss fight where you're fighting on the roller coaster a la Be a Clown is really iconic to me.
Oh yeah.
The Catwoman midair fight that you have. And this is one that, as we mentioned, kind of similarly to the Game Boy, but even in the levels, they would use kind of music from the show. Like we have the Catwoman theme all throughout that sequence where you're chasing her across rooftops, and then as you're kind of having this midair fight with her, as you're both falling. That's a really fun sequence, and that's kind of the one that really stands out in my head. I do have some love for the Penguin level, which is less. That's one that I think is less based. Although I think the boss fight of it is a little bit more based on. There's a little bit of you fight a giant bird at one point, like I guess in Almost Gotham, is he in the helicopter from? Our just recently reviewed Blind as a Bat in that as well.
Helicopter does make an appearance. Yeah, it's in that. It sort of pops up. You have fisticuffs, and then there's a portion of the fight where he takes to the air with his sort of propeller umbrella, and during that time the helicopter flies up, and you have to sort of dodge the bullets that the helicopter is shooting.
So yeah, that sequence was fun, I think, because also as we mentioned, being a big Robin fan, you don't get to play as Robin in the game, but that Penguin game, Robin is there for most of that in person, and you're kind of going on all these missions. At one point, the lights get shut out, and you're kind of you have to turn on your flashlight to try to avoid these landmines that have been pressed, and you're trying to kind of go around and get the lights back on, and then Robin gets captured and you have to rescue him, and then that sets up that final mission. So yeah, there's definitely some standout ones. I think Catwoman and Penguin, and as you mentioned, the Riddler one, just because of the pretty great and faithful recreation from, you fight the Minotaur at one point, you have Riddler appearing to you on the big video screen as you go through the level. You're blowing holes in walls with the bombs and everything. But yeah, there's a lot of that one, as we said, is less of its, maybe you could say, well, it's not as original because you're just using stuff from the game. But that to me was like, that's a great way and a great piece of just like revisiting those classic moments, almost more of the way that I think we saw movie tie-in games for superhero stuff not even superhero stuff, just kids movies in general had like a tie-in video game that would kind of loosely follow the plot of whatever it was that was tying in with, but would kind of go off in its own direction as well. And as you said, you kind of have that final level where you fight Clayface and Man-Bat, as well as some other villains you already faced earlier in the game. So there's a lot of fun to be had across those levels. And yeah, this one is hard to beat as far as just fun. I think, like, again, I think you could, like you said, I could plug this in today and still have fun with it. And then on top of that, if you add in the nostalgia and the great soundtrack and everything, I think this is a pretty big 2 thumbs up for this one.
Yeah, I agree. And we'd be remiss not to mention, of course, the legendary quote unquote lost episode of Batman, the animated series, which know come from the Sega CD version of this game. So if you're interested about that, maybe we'll do a bonus episode later on at some point. You can just search YouTube for Lost Batman the Animated Series episode. There's somebody has sort of edited all the cutscenes from that sort of advanced for the time. It was pre-PlayStation 1 era, but a little bit more advanced than the 16 and 8-bit generation Super Nintendo system. So you get some interesting cutscenes that sort of make up this quote unquote lost episode. But Liam, as you mentioned, so we had Super Nintendo, and from Super Nintendo, we had the original Nintendo system, and then we had Super Nintendo. From that point, I don't know why the decision was made, if it was just because it was hip or cool at the time, or the multi-functions that the PlayStation was promising. But we switched companies at that point. We switched loyalties. We were gifted a PlayStation at some point for a holiday, and with that, basically there went at that point a bit of a dry spell for DCAU games. There was, of course, the legendary Superman 64, which again probably deserves its own bonus episode to talk about people that have attempted to play this, but it is a legendarily bad game.
Yes, it was so bad. There was a promise, to my memory, or at least there was advertising saying that it was coming to PlayStation 1. I remember being very upset and jealous when I saw that it was out on N64 and not on PlayStation 1, because I really wanted to play it. But then, yes, as it would come to be known, if you look up just like worst video games of all time or worst Nintendo games of all time, this one ends up on near the top of a lot of people's lists, just because it's not only is it not a particularly like compelling game from a narrative standpoint or a level structure or whatever, it's also like barely functional as far as just like can you get Superman to like fly towards the thing you want him to fly towards? So it's a real mess, but it is sort of legendary because of how terrible it is. So yeah, we would be remiss not to give it a passing mention, though we have no personal experience with it other than maybe seeing some YouTube playthroughs years later.
That's right. Maybe we can petition for Ted from Watchtower Database to do a Superman 64 playthrough. I think a good troll job would be in.
Yeah, that's. I mean, he's got to play them all at some point, right? This has got to be on the list.
There you go. Well, around that same time, the next iteration of DCAU games would come to pass, and it would come to PlayStation, the original PlayStation, and that would be the Batman Gotham City Racer game, which featured actually the new Batman adventure style. So we're set in the new Batman adventures at this point, released only for the Sony PlayStation, I believe, and it was actually, speaking of cutscenes, incorporated clips from the new Batman adventures. Several episodes were featured as part of the storyline for this. But this one, we posted some of the games. It's interesting on social media earlier this week. And this one surprisingly got some hate that I was not expecting, because I don't remember it being bad. I know that it's a little goofy, and you are in the car 100% of the time. You are in a car, or you could drive the motorcycles too, the bat cycle too, maybe. I don't remember. Or are you 100% in the Batmobile the whole time?
So in the non-story, because there was like multiplayer or I think computer, where you could just kind of drive around and it wasn't related to the story, you could play as the Batmobile. There's a bat cycle, which is also Batman. You have a Batgirl motorcycle, which is like black and yellow, and then you had the Nightwing motorcycle as well.
Okay. All right. I knew there was some motorcycles in there.
Yes. So you had 3 motorcycles in the Batmobile. In the story mode, I think you only play as the Batmobile, except for one mission where they use clips from Holiday Nights of Bruce Wayne being kidnapped by Harley and Ivy, where you do play as Batgirl in that sequence. But yeah, that's another one where, from a functionality standpoint, could I go back and play it now? No, I'm sure the cars probably handle like dirt. I'm sure it would be terrible to try to go back to it now. But at the time, I had a lot of fun playing with this, both in the regular mode and, as we mentioned, this is pre-DVD collections. We did not have every single episode, and I don't remember having too many episodes at all of the new Batman Adventures taped. So it was also a way to like watch moments from those episodes over and over again. Without
kids, YouTube wasn't around back then. You couldn't just pull up clips of any shows that you wanted to and find them on the interwebs. Is not as readily available. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it did incorporate some of the clips from the episodes. I want to say Over the Edge maybe too. Was
yes, they show the shot of Batgirl falling on the car, and they're like, all right, she needs to get to the hospital, drive her there. Like there was some pretty fun, wacky sequences.
But it's a lot of driving through maps and the Batmobile shoots batarangs, and all the villains have their own versions of cars, and it's all done in the style of at least of the new Batman Adventures. I definitely remember playing this a lot. I don't think this is one that would hold up these days, if we're being completely honest. Especially it's not open world. There's a very specific maps that you're required to like drive around. I remember the most frustrating thing is just driving around and you have to chase these cars around endlessly to stop them. And there's always, it gets more difficult as you go through the game. But yeah, this was the one next on the list, at least, that we played. We had some nostalgic memories about it, but I don't anticipate this being on our top favorite lists.
No, I don't think so either. Like I said, I definitely played it a lot, had some joy to it because of the clips from the show that we got to revisit, but that was not again, like you said, not one that I think would hold up upon a replay on modern times.
For sure.
And that will bring us to our next entry on the list, which is one that I probably would replay, even though I know it would probably not hold up super well. But that is, of course, Batman Vengeance in 2001. Came out for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, I should say, and I believe the original Xbox as well. But this one is, again, firmly set in the new Batman Adventures timeline. And it's a pretty interesting. This is one, again, we're into the era of cutscenes. We have CGI cutscenes. So we have a CGI representation of the new Batman Adventures world. But I think this one is like, there is the bones of what the Arkham games would later become in this. Yeah. From both the mechanics of what you do, like you have little like puzzles and problem solving to do with your various gadgets. Plus, there's sequences where you're going over rooftops and you use a mix of your grappling hook and gliding and things like that to get around. And then you have kind of a combat system where you're punching and kicking, but you also have to kind of block and wait for openings to attack certain guys. And you can kind of, if you can get the drop on them, you can kind of take them down quickly with stealth and things like that. So I do think that even though this is, I'm sure, again, would be very clunky and frustrating to play now, this has that going for it. And then I think it also, not unlike the Batman Arkham games that would come later on, it has a pretty interesting like narrative to it, in that we go through these missions, we fight the Joker appears to die falling off of a bridge, and then we kind of, as Batman is fighting against other villains like Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy, we still have the specter of the Joker hanging over us, and then it sort of comes to, spoiler alert for a game that came out in 2001, but later on it is revealed later on in the game, after Batman goes undercover and then the Joker's old hideout, that he is in fact alive, and that it's been this sort of elaborate ruse all along. And it sets up kind of this epic final encounter where you have to fly the bat plane. That's the other thing too, is you talk about vehicle sections. You not only drive the Batmobile, but you have the bat plane in a couple of levels, as well, as you have to kind of set up this final confrontation with the Joker. But so I think that's what stands out to me, is not only did you have like what at the time was a pretty fun, innovative game as far as the different types of stuff you got to do, but you also have like a pretty strong narrative as far as creating like this big dramatic moment where the Joker falls off the bridge, and then kind of the mystery surrounding this and how it all fits together with these various characters and these various villains as it goes forward.
Yeah, it's a long playthrough. There's 19 levels that you play through. I think what this did most successfully, and again, we had this for PlayStation 2. It also was on GameCube, Game Boy Advance, Xbox, and Microsoft Windows also for the computer. But, I think what is most memorable about this game is that it felt like you were authentically dropped into the Batman animated series universe. You have, not only does it feel like you're taking part in it, you're taking control of Batman in this. The character models were directly 3D models of what you basically see on television every Saturday morning, or you had been seeing on Saturday morning for years. You have the voice cast returning. You had not only Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy reprising their roles. You had Diane Pershing. You had Arlene Sorkin. You had Michael Ansara. You have Ephraim Zemblis Jr. # My Alfred is in the game. And then, of course, Tara Strong.
Strong as Batgirl.
Yeah. Lloyd Bachner as Mayor Hamilton Hill, and Bob Hastings as Commissioner Gordon, both reprising their roles. It felt like you were authentically in this universe. And it's fun to build. As you said, there's little puzzles that you have to figure out. There's the classic elements of a Batman fighting game, and I think you're spot on with the observation that this sort of paved the way for what ultimately you would come to know and love as the Batman Arkham games. And I can remember being so excited from just seeing it, like in a Toys R Us flyer or something, the cover of this, and not know, of course, this is pre popularity of the internet, where everybody knows when things are coming out and games are being developed. And this was super surprising to hear that this was coming out, just the anticipation. And then when you play it actually being fulfilling and fun. I think that's great. And I think also this brought title cards into the new Batman Adventures, which is super awesome. We talked about that was something they ended up doing away with when they transitioned from Batman the Animated Series over to the new Batman Adventures. And the fact that the developers of this game, Ubisoft and the people at Ubisoft Montreal decided to include these little while loading screens, all the loading screens had these title cards for each level, each 5 parts of the game. I really, really loved that too.
Yeah, absolutely. That, like I said, it's just a good package overall. It's different. Like the gadget stuff is all kind of like this first person style. You're throwing a batarang or you're trying to line up your grappling gun or whatever, and you have a good variety of stuff to do. There's I think maybe if a single level, there's probably 2. One is ironically, again, because of where we know this is another favorite of people who have played the Arkham games, but the Mr. Freeze boss fight, I think is pretty fun because it's one where you kind of have to use your head and you kind of have to lure him into certain positions and drop these big canisters on his head to hurt him. You can't go up and just punch him. So there's some strategy to that and getting him to kind of follow you in the right place while not getting, frozen yourself. And then there's a sequence where a batarang is thrown and hits Commissioner Gordon in the head. And then Batman is on the run from the cops from a SWAT team, from the famous. That alone has to put on this list because we have the famous Gotham City SWAT team appearing in the game. So that alone has to make it onto our probably both of our favorites list. We'll get to in a little bit here, but yeah, that's that sequence where you're running away from the cops and you got this you're kind of running and there's this helicopter chasing you and all this kind of crazy stuff as you're trying to kind of keep your distance while you're waiting for Batgirl to come get you or whatever. So yeah, there's a good bit of incorporating that stuff into a video game, and like I think you really nailed it there when you said it felt like you were living out and kind of getting to experience a lost, for lack of a better term, like another story in this universe, and that's always going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So, Liam, 2001 to 2003 really seems like the golden age of DCAU video games. At least that there were a lot that were being produced at that time. So not only did we have these Batman games, and we'll talk about the sequel to Batman Vengeance in just a moment, but around the same time, we had Superman Shadow of Apocalypse, which we already talked about, the dubious reputation that Superman video games have had going all the way back to, I think there was a Super Nintendo Superman game based on the Death of Superman storyline that didn't necessarily receive positive reviews. It's hard to translate the character of Superman into video games, because how do you translate an impervious character and still have a effective, fun video game? And to me, I think the best way that has ever been done is with our next game, which was an Atari game from 2002. Yes, Atari, the company that was responsible for the original video game system, essentially, or the popularity of video game systems taking off, at least. We have Superman Shadow of Apocalypse, which is another one of those where I remember seeing the advertisement in a flyer and going, man, that looks awesome. I can't wait to try this. This was also released for PlayStation 2 and GameCube. We had it for PS2. This one, and I think there was a Game Boy Advance game that was sort of related to it that was called Superman Countdown to Apocalypse. Never played that one, but had some sort of connection to this one here. But this one is interesting because, again, you have returning voice actors playing the characters in the game. You have Tim Daly as Clark Kent, you have Dana Delaney as Lois Lane, Malcolm McDowell as Metallo, Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor. We do get Parasite in the game. He was recast because the Brian James, the gentleman that played him originally, passed away, unfortunately. So they did recast him, but Brian George would eventually play this role again in Justice League. So they use the same voice actor there. So this, honestly, I remember playing this a lot too. And this is, from my recollection at least, is a lot of fun. And maybe to date, the best, notwithstanding we have a game that features Superman. We've had several games that have featured him, but they tend to be just fighting games outside of this. But this might be the best solo Superman game in the history of video games.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I think it's certainly the best of the ones we've played. I think maybe now, and it would have to be like a big AAA, millions and millions of dollars poured into it. I think there's a way to do a Superman game in like an open world that everybody's kind of always wanted, but it would cost a lot of money and you'd probably have to have really unique boss fights. But I think what worked for this game is they do give you a couple of levels where you're able to kind of fly around in the larger city and kind of feel what it is to be Superman. And you're the kind of the first tutorial level, you're flying around and you're kind of solving problems. You have to save a bus that's falling off a ledge, and you're doing putting out some fires with your freeze breath and all that stuff. So they do give you some pretty fun things to do as far as like problem solving besides punching people with your powers. But then I think the other thing is they do keep it pretty narratively based, where there's a dam that's breaking and you have to go there to track it down. And then you do start to get some of those classic villains from Superman the Animated Series. You have a live wire sequence. You have a Metallo boss fight. It's actually the final boss fight of the game is against Metallo in like a car manufacturing plant or something. And it's kind of a great sequence where you think you've beaten him, and then he ends up in an explosion where all of his fake synthetic flesh is removed, and we kind of get that Terminator looking Metallo returning for the real final boss fight. And as you mentioned, probably maybe my standout level is the Parasite boss fight, where you basically fight a clone of yourself, but you are in the kind of the larger city. So not only can you sort of punch him and use your heat vision and all that stuff, but you also get to pick up cars and stuff and kind of fly all around. And if you position it right, at the kind of the final blow of the battle happens in a cutscene where Superman knocks like part of the freeway down on top of him. But if you positioned cars into the right point of it, you could actually have the cars drop on Parasite in the cutscene too, which we would always try to set up and get annoyed when Parasite kept coming up to fight us. It was like, no, give us a second. We're just trying to set up the cars so it looks cool when we drop this on you. But yeah, I think the boss fights, especially near the end of the game, are what it stands out. And as you mentioned, having so much of the voice cast returning for this game, as we did, of course, Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor. And yeah, unfortunately, it is an entire game. We do have inner gang, as kind of this looming sort of the regular bad guys that you kind of just tear through as Superman. And we do get kind of opening and closing scenes with Michael Ironside's Dark Side, as well as Kanto, I believe you see. But you don't. It's kind of setting up a sequel that we'll never get, sadly. So we don't actually ever come to blows with Darkseid, despite Shadow of Apocalypse being the name of the game. But yeah, as a game, I think there's definitely a lot of fun. And then this is also interesting in that there's at least one or two levels where you're not playing as Superman. You're playing as Clark Kent, so you're not allowed to kind of fly around and tear through everything. You kind of have to use your stealth and you have to be a little bit smarter about it. So there's definitely a little bit of variety there, as far as it's not just a beat 'em up, so to speak.
Yeah. And there are some cutscenes and some things I think that are included that really ground this in there. They use cell shading. It's sort of 3D cell shading for the time. Again, this is PlayStation 2 graphics, but at the time, at least, it was it was pretty neat. And again, I think all you're looking for with these games, especially as you progressed with the better and better graphics, was to feel like you were still authentically in the DCAU, taking place in this, playing through an episode while being able to have some fun gameplay. And the Superman Shadow of Apocalypse, I feel like, does that pretty effectively.
Agreed. And that will bring us to another handheld console, this time the Game Boy Advance, as mentioned. And there was a couple of Justice League games made for that. There's one called Justice League Chronicles that came later on. But the one I'd like to talk about for a moment here, Cal, and this is more for me. I know you played it a little bit, but I was definitely spent quite a few hours playing and then replaying this. That is, of course, the Justice League Injustice for All game for the Game Boy Advance, which also came out in 2002. And it is a pretty fun experience. It's not, you don't necessarily get like a full-on, like we said, it's on the Game Boy, so you don't have cutscenes or anything, but you do have a sort of loose narrative. Each level you're saddled with two different Justice Leaguers, and maybe not totally unlike the Adventures of Batman and Robin game for Super Nintendo. You're kind of revisiting moments from the show where it kind of opens up. You're chasing down Lex Luthor in his kind of airship that you see at the start of the aforementioned episode in Justice for All. And then, there's a round where you go to Gorilla City. There's one where you fight the aliens from the pilot episode of Justice League. And, a few other villains pop up like Star Sapphire and those. And kind of finally all culminates in one final level where you do actually get to play as all 7 members of the team at once. And you get to fight the Justice League. And you get to fight as the Justice League against Lex Luthor, who becomes the final boss. But there's boss fights against the Joker and lots of other of the villains that we saw in that, of course, that classic 2-part episode Injustice for All with the original Injustice gang there. So maybe not not on the level of the last 2 we've talked about, but one that's definitely near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, and I like when I think about this game, I literally think about you sitting crisscross applesauce with your headphones on, listening to music on your CD player while holding the Game Boy Advance in your hands on your bed, like playing this game. So yeah, I don't have as many memories playing this. I definitely remember giving it a try and playing it out. And that's one of the big things that we ultimately, for this era, and to this date, I don't know, you could argue that the Injustice games, I guess, are Justice League games, but we've never really had a great Justice League video game. And that's what's so interesting about this, is that superheroes sometimes don't translate effectively to good video games. It's very hard sometimes. That's why I think the Batman Arkham games tend to stand out, because they are so not only written well, of course, Paul Dini having his hand in the majority of that, but the action is fun, not very repetitive. Like
and I think part of that also is it's hard, and I think to throw a little shade at the other side of the big 2 comics world, it's hard, I think, to create a compelling game with multiple like all-powerful heroes in it that feels good and feels like feels like you're doing justice, no pun intended, to all of those different characters with these different power sets and stuff. And there are definitely some limitations, like where they're like, there's a level where like, oh, Hawkgirl got shot in the wing, she can't fly in this level. You're like, all right, I guess we'll just do that then. Like, but but I think so. I think it can be challenging to make a compelling game that really lets these characters live up to the power that we see them have in the cartoons or in comic books or whatever, or movies in some cases. And sometimes it can be feeling flat because you've kind of created this general thing where you have to be able to plug in anyone from Superman to Batman to Hawkgirl to the Flash and have them all be able to kind of navigate the same way through the level. So I think there are some limitations and some big challenges if you decide to do like an ensemble team game in that style, where it's still kind of where you still want it to be kind of a single player experience like that versus maybe a co-op beat 'em up like you said with the Justice League Heroes game or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Liam. Well, believe it or not, we are coming to our final game that we'll be discussing here. Now, of course, as we mentioned, this is not an entire list of games. There's other Game Boy games. The other legendarily bad, awful DCAU video game, which again populates on a lot of those worst video games of all time lists, that being Batman Beyond: Return of the Joker, which, man, is it a crying shame that one of the coolest versions of the Dark Knight ever has never gotten a second chance at redemption after that disaster. Another one that you can kind of look up and do some research if you're interested in hearing as to the story behind it, but it's a difficult game that had no save points basically, and that caused a lot of people to be frustrated by that. But our final game that we'll be discussing here, at least the ones that we played and enjoyed, is going to be the effective sequel to Batman Vengeance, that being Batman Rise of Sinsu, which, you may be asking, who? What? And the answer is exactly. They decided to do the sequel for this game. They actually changed things up. Instead of the story-driven single-person sort of occasional combat that you encounter in puzzles, this is a straight-up beat-em-up game. Lots of button pounding and constant fighting going on, and all culminating with this created villain. Jim Lee, president of DC Comics, I believe, is credited with the creation of this villain, who has never been seen from or heard from again. But was an interesting character. But I will say that, Liam, again, we played this, we beat this. This was a PlayStation 2 game that was released in November of 2003. I think this is definitely not as fun as Batman Vengeance. I think it was cool because you definitely got to, this has Batgirl, Batman, Robin, and Nightwing. It was a co-op game, so you could play it with somebody as opposed to just sitting there watching your brother. And when you have siblings, it's important to be able to have a game that you can play together, so that one person is simply not dominating, as I'm sure that you, being the younger sibling, experienced a lot in your life. But so it was cool that you got to have your sibling play with you. Our sister played with us at times, as Batgirl. So there was some of that, but it is extremely repetitive from my recollection. And while you do have the villains, you have Scarecrow and Clayface and Bane involved, who obviously those villains were not involved in the prior game. It is extremely repetitive, and by the end of it, you're just kind of wishing that it would be over from my recollection.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that doesn't hold up. The co-op nature of it, if you're just hanging out with your siblings or your buddies or whatever after school or something, and you're looking for something you can play together kind of mindlessly while you talk or whatever, just kind of veg out and don't have to pay that much attention to it. I can see this being enjoyable, and obviously, yes, getting to play as Robin and Nightwing and Batgirl was kind of a cool wrinkle to add to it. But yeah, from a gameplay standpoint, it's just you're just mashing buttons, and they give you some special attacks, but it's really nothing that deep, and it doesn't really feel like you get that much more out of it. I mean, the strength probably, or the most enjoyable part, is there are once again sort of CGI cut scenes. Although no matter who you're playing as, Batman is the only one present in the cutscenes. Unfortunately, we don't get Robin or Nightwing or Batgirl in the cutscenes, but you do have a lot of that Batman the Animated Series and New Batman Adventures voice cast coming back, as well as a few replacement actors from other animated things. We have, I think we're playing Bane is Hector Elizondo, who also voiced him in the Batman Mystery of the Batwoman straight to DVD movie, which I believe came out like the same week as this, or at least I remember us getting them at the same time.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it was a simultaneous, or if not within a couple of weeks, they both were released.
Yes, so that I remember being kind of a little bit of synergy there. But you also had you do have Lauren Lester back as Nightwing. You have Tara Strong as Batgirl, and of course Kevin Conroy as Batman. But then you also have playing Robin. You don't have Matt Valencia or even Eli Marenthal, who I believe played Robin in the Mystery of the Batwoman movie. You have Scott Menville, who of course had begun to voice a different Robin on the Teen Titans show at the time. So it's interesting to hear him mixed in there with the classic DCAU run. But you do have Jeffrey Combs back as Scarecrow, as well as Ron Perlman as Clayface, and then we don't have Joker or Two-Face or Mr. Freeze or any of those characters. And then, as you mentioned, we have this finale where it all leads up to you fighting a villain no one's ever heard of, who kind of has vaguely defined magic powers. That's the other thing too. I don't remember the boss fights even being particularly like fun. It's just like you kind of dodge and you wait for the guy to stop attacking, and then you run up and punch until he starts attacking you again, and then you're back to dodging or fighting his minions or whatever until it's time to fight him again. But there's some fun stuff as far as just again visiting that world a little bit longer and getting some of the supporting characters involved in the fighting, but it is just fighting kind of all the way through, and not a particularly inspired fighting game either.
That's right. All right. Well, now we have played through all of these, but we've discussed our at least the ones that we have nostalgic attachment to in this list, Liam. But I guess now comes the difficult task of ranking our top three from this list. So I will defer to you as the younger sibling and allow you to give your third and second favorite, and then we can both really reveal our top after that.
All right, so I am going to go with number 3. I'm going to go Batman Vengeance. That one, like for all the reasons we talked about, we don't really have to rehash it here, but just a great experience. Lost many an afternoon to this game, and still would play it today. But that one's my number 3, and then my number 2 will be. I think that will just, again, for like sheer hours played, I think it has to be the Justice League and Justice for All game for Game Boy Advance. I think just the amount of time I played with that, and I can still see like the aerial battle with Lex's ship or some of the more creative stuff they did with it that just really sticks with me even now that I looked up a little playthrough of it earlier in the week, and there's just sequences from that game that'll stick with me long when I'm on my deathbed and I've forgotten names and faces long past. I will still remember that final sequence where you can play as all 7 fighting Lex Luthor. So that's my number 2. What about your number 3 and number 2?
So number 3, I'm going to have to go Shadow of Apocalypse. I think just finally getting something different, having played all of these Batman games, you'll notice there is a theme here that the majority of these games are Batman centric, or Batman the Animated Series, or New Batman Adventures centric. So having the ability to finally play it, even though we didn't know that we were actually saved from some frustration, but having the Superman PlayStation game taken away from us, not ever being able to play that, it never being released on a console that we owned, was always felt like a miscarriage of justice in a completely dramatic, ironic way. Finally being able to play as Superman, it being a pretty fun game, it feeling like you were in the universe that it was based in, all of that, I think, led to that to be pretty fun. And then number 2, I think, is Batman Vengeance. I think for the same reasons, just hours played, a very compelling story that I think going back now, I've remembering all the minutia details and just the the care that the developers of that game took, again, to make you feel like you were authentically back in the new Batman Adventures universe. Mind you, this is 3 or 4 years removed from brand new episodes in this series that they made this game. So the care that they took to put you back in that universe, absolutely adored it. So I guess that will bring me to my number one. And that has to be for so many of the reasons that we already talked about, but it has to be The Adventures of Batman and Robin for Super Nintendo.
Oh yeah, same for me. No question about it. Like I said, just for a mix of, I think it would hold up today from just like a simplicity. It's like I said, it's got the side scroller. You're doing a little bit of puzzles. You're doing a little bit of punching. Like it's simple enough, but it's satisfying little loop of gameplay. And then, like we said, revisiting all of these classic episodes of the series in video game form. Like, yeah, that one's for nostalgia, and I think for like a total package point of view, that one's going to hold up the best for us, and not surprisingly, perhaps is both of our number ones.
There you go. All right, so now we're going to have a little bit of fun, Liam, before we get out of here. The last two things that we're going to do. So we're going to have a little bit of fun. We're going to go back in time first and foremost. We're going to get in our time machine, and we're going to say, all right, so we've listed these fun games, our favorite games. And some of them, I guess one of them in the case of Batman Vengeance did ultimately have a sequel, although it was in a very different style. But the rest of them on our list, and most of these on this list altogether, never got actual sequels. Like nowadays, that's the hallmark of a game. Like a good gaming, you get not just one game, it's an entire series of games. So if you were to hop back in a time machine and you were to go back and say, all right, I'm going to create a sequel for this game, which on our list here that we've played, or maybe even one of the other ones that we never played, would you create a sequel for?
Yeah, I think it would be Batman Vengeance, but I would make it a narrative sequel set in the time of Batman Beyond. That's kind of cheating, I think, based on what you described. I think you can translate most of that game's engine into a Batman Beyond game. You swap out the bat plane sequences for the flying Batmobile, and then you have the gliding mechanic there, and then the rest of it is just like we said, just combat and like gadgets and puzzles, which I think would translate. So I think you can take some of those elements of this, like that the Dr. Isaac Evers, who has this mysterious chemical that that the Joker and Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy are kind of all after, because it all kind of has different uses, it seems. And so I think maybe you do some kind of sequel to that from a story perspective, but you kind of flash forward a little bit, and that's how we get our good, or at least decent, Batman Beyond game that we never got and still deserve.
There you go. So I think I would, just to be different, because I do think a Batman Vengeance game in the same vein would have been much appreciated and needed. I'll say a sequel to The Adventures of Batman and Robin for Super Nintendo, and I think you could definitely change up some of the things that were done, use the same idea. I think in the Sega versions, you actually got the opportunity to play as Robin in at least one of the levels. So I think at least a level or two of the game where you played as Robin, which ironically, it's an Adventures of Batman and Robin game, which I'm pretty sure they just titled it that because that's what the show was retitled. But Robin, you don't ever actually get to play as Robin. So a game where you get to play as Robin, I think, or at least for part of it, would be interesting. Obviously, there's so many episodes of that original Batman the Animated Series run that you could draw some of the moments from, even if you decide to use some of the same villains. But you could use, Killer Croc was not used in the game. The Mad Hatter was not used in the Super Nintendo version of the game. I think he was in the Sega games. Yes. Mr. Freeze, again, I think used in the Sega games, not in the Super Nintendo games. So you could have adapted some of those other things that were used in the other systems, and then kind of create a sequel around that utilized Robin and allowed you to play as him, because that's again the nostalgic feelings for that always left you wanting, like, man, I wish there was more levels to this game. So a direct sequel to that I think would have been a lot of fun.
Love it.
All right, Liam. Well, then our final piece of fun for the day is it's 2021. The DCAU brand is still going strong. We are now far away from our last DCAU versions of video games, despite what the DCAU wiki says that there was a VR game, I think, for Viewmaster released by Mattel in 2016. We likely have not had a game, a DCAU game since the Justice League games, more than likely. So, it's 2021 with the popularity of nostalgia and the brand. If you're in control, let's say you're in charge of Warner Brothers and you're going to a game developer, you get to create a game modern day on a modern platform set in the DCAU. What's your pitch for a DCAU game for a modern console?
Yeah, I think for me, and I threw a little shade at Marvel games earlier, and I'll now give them a compliment. Maybe it's in the running. If we're talking of all superhero games from all companies, the X-Men Legends games and then the subsequent Marvel Ultimate Alliance games that kind of came out of those are some of my favorite superhero games of any console, any generation, anytime. So those stick very highly with me. It was, I thought, a good way to have a bunch of characters. In this case, you have a team of heroes. You can mix and match if you want to do, especially in the bigger games, the Ultimate Alliance games that have the bigger roster. If you want to stick to teams that make sense, you can do a team of just X-Men, or you can put all four of the Fantastic Four. But you can also mix it up, and you can have the Human Torch and Spider-Man and Luke Cage and Ghost Rider team up or something. You can do all these wacky different combinations. And so I think my pitch would be, in the style of the Marvel Ultimate Alliance games, I would do a Justice League Unlimited game where you have a similarly expansive roster. Give me 20 to 25 characters. You got some big, strong ones. You got some fast ones. You got some ones that are better at fighting. Maybe some that are tougher but aren't as. Some that are tougher but maybe aren't as fast or as strong. Give me a good mix of those JLU heroes that we saw over the years on the show, and give me a Marvel Ultimate Alliance style adventure where I can pick four of them and send them into an arena to punch some bad guys.
I love that. All right, so I'm going to go off the beaten path here. I would love a Batman Beyond game. We talked about that. Poor guy, never to be seen or heard from again after his poor performance in Return of the Joker. But I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path. So one of the things we didn't touch on is, of course, there are always games that are put into development but then never realized. And one of those, interestingly enough, is there was a Static Shock video game that was scheduled to be released based on the cartoon for Game Boy and then never saw the light of day. So because of that, I think, sort of in the similar vein that we've seen the Spider-Man games, the successful Spider-Man games that have come out for the PlayStation platform, imagine a semi-open world type game where you are Virgil Hawkins and introduce the Milestone characters, the Milestone universe, but have Phil Lamar come in there and you get to, you're in Dakota, you're defending the world. It maybe not use the DCAU style completely 1-to-1, but put it in that same more maybe season 3 and 4 Static Shock style, and incorporate some of those lesser known villains. You have quite a rogues gallery there, fun to use. He's not a character that's necessarily overpowered like you would with a Superman or even like a Flash game or something like that. But this character that has its vulnerability set very similarly to Superman or to Spider-Man as a younger kid who's still kind of working his way through discovering what it means to be a superhero, and a fascinating rogues gallery. And you know that Warner Brothers is interested in this property because they're doing all kinds of things with the static property itself right now, and the Milestone property. Mm-hmm. So why not introduce that to a whole new set of kids with a Static Shock video game that should have been made that never got made?
I love that idea. 'Cause, yeah, we got as far as like there were ads in comic books for that Static game, and then it just at the 11th hour, the plug was pulled and we never got it. But yeah, I think a more modern sort of console adventure where you get to fly around in Dakota and you meet all of like you said, like the more modern Spider-Man games or the Arkham games, where you can kind of go on a little bit of a tour of his rogues gallery, where maybe you start out with some of the lesser powerful ones, maybe a Carmandillo appearance, for instance.
Oh heck yes!
As maybe like the opening boss. And then you work your way up to the Hot Streaks and Ebons and those level of guys, and maybe you get cameos from Gear and Rubber Band Man and some of the supporting casts as well. So yeah, I would love a fun narrative and sort of as you said, sort of semi-open world Static game. I think that's a brilliant idea. I kind of just want to play it now that you said it.
All right, so developers at Warner Brothers Games, or whoever is in charge of their games, you heard it here first. Just get TMCR. Just give us the idea. Just give us credit. Consult us or something. Allow us to have voice cameos. Something. I don't know. But yeah, that's all we ask for. Anyway, yes, love this. Liam, such a great time talking video games today. Of course, we'd love to hear listeners' thoughts on these. Which of these games that we mentioned did you love? We already put it out there this week on our social media at DCAU Review on Instagram and on Twitter, discussing what our listeners' favorite games are. Lots of different responses. So make sure you hit us up on social media. Send a slide into our DMs if you have a thought or two on DCAU Video Games, and let us know which of these not only were your favorites. Maybe send us your idea for your own elevator pitch for a DCAU video game on a modern console. We'd love to hear that. You can also, of course, check out our standard issue or You, of course, can check out our standard episode, which will be dropping tomorrow. If you're listening to this on Black Friday, we are covering Static Shock all month, so we have an exciting one for that. Don't forget, you can support the podcast by liking us, you can support the podcast by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast app and leaving a review. Leave us a 5-star review or give us a little blurb about what it is that you like about the podcast. You can also subscribe to us on the Pod Tower, as we already mentioned, on YouTube. That helps us, and it also gets our friends over at Tim Talk and Watchtower Database. They are also involved with that, so definitely subscribe to that. You can also support us this week. Black Friday special happening via our merch store. You can check that out at DCAUreview.com and click on the store tab. That'll take you there. We got shirts and hats and mugs. Spreadshirt having a sale all weekend, so you'll want to check that out. Liam, lots of fun talking to you. I can't wait to do this again next year.
That's right. We will, of course, continue the Black Friday tradition, and nothing concrete in the plans yet, but I think video games, and then specifically DC video games, is a topic we may or may not revisit somewhere down the lines, and maybe a little bit more in depth in the future, because I had a lot of fun, and I can't wait to see what our listeners and our Twitter followers and Instagram followers think as well. And definitely want to hear those pitches for what you would like to see if a new DCAU game was made, or if you have an idea of one you wished you got back in the day. Definitely want to hear about that as well. So hit us up and let us know, and we'll see you back for our regular episode soon, and we'll see you next year for our next Black Friday bonus.
Can't wait. But until then, I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we'll talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.